Hey everyone, we're going to look at several models of the spinal cord. We've got one model here which I really like because it shows it in context of the vertebrae. We've got this one, we've got this one, and we got this one. They're all showing cross sections of the vertebrae. You should also take a look at the histology, which shows the exact same thing just on a slide. So if you haven't checked out the histology one, go to the playlists for histology videos and you'll find it there. All right, let's start with where are we? So we're showing a cross-section of the spinal cord. Imagine we're right here, or even right here. You can see the cut spinal cord and we're looking at the vertebrae surrounding it. That's what we see here. Here's a spinous process. So this is posterior or dorsal. Here's the body where the intervertebral disc would be. That's anterior or ventral. These flat things, those are, these are the superior articular facets. The inferior ones would be underneath. Where's an example? So here's a superior articular facet. Sorry. Superior articular facet, inferior. Or superior, inferior is this one. So we're just looking at one on either side. This would be the intervertebral foramen. One on one side, one on another. You've got the spinal nerve exiting or entering. You've got nerves going back and forth here. That's what we see here, intervertebral foramen. Other things I want to point out. Dura mater is what covers the whole thing. The whole spinal cord, I should say, dura mater. Pia mater covers the spinal cord directly, and then in between you've got arachnoid. If we didn't have, let me back up one more thing. What vertebra are we at? We can see that this has a bifid process and a body, so it's not C1, it's not C2, there's no dens. This is C3 or C3, C4, C5, or C6. I can say confidently it's one of those. C3, C4, C5, or C6 because it is a bifid process and no dens. Now looking just at the spinal cord and the spinal nerves, we can see that the spinal nerve branches into a dorsal root and to a ventral root. How do I know that this side is dorsal? There's a few giveaways. If I didn't have this vertebra, like here, there's no vertebra here, how do I know which side is which? Look for the really deep fissure. The deep fissure tells you it's anterior or ventral. This is the anterior median fissure. Anterior median fissure. Ooh, where are we here? Oh, it's flipped. Anterior median fissure. So they're all showing anterior median fissure. If you look at the video where I go over a real spinal cord, which you should look at if you haven't, you'll notice that there's a blood vessel here in the anterior median fissure. That's also a giveaway that you're on the anterior side. Another giveaway is that look at where this bulge is coming off of the dorsal root. I know that this is the dorsal root ganglion. There is no ganglion for the ventral root because the definition of a ganglion is a cluster of cell bodies of neurons in the peripheral nervous system. You only have cell bodies for sensory neurons here in the dorsal root ganglion. The neurons for motor neurons are going to be in the ventral horn, which we'll name in a second. So this also tells you this is dorsal, this is ventral, posterior, anterior, same thing. All right. Anterior median fissure, dorsal median sulcus. This dorsal median sulcus is continuous with the medulla, and you can see that here. Medulla coming out, this is the dorsal median sulcus of the medulla. Continuing on to the spinal cord. Dorsal root ganglion, ventral root, dorsal ganglion's hiding in here, and they combine to form a single spinal nerve. You can see the dorsal ganglia on this model as well. The very, very center, that's the central canal. The central canal, that's what is filled, it is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. It's lined with ependymal cells, and we're supplying nutrients to, I guess it's all hollowed out right here. We're supplying nutrients to these neurons. This butterfly shape, this is gray matter. This is where you find the cell bodies of neurons. So gray matter, cell bodies of neurons. Since this is dorsal, this is the dorsal horn. You typically find cell bodies of second-order sensory neurons. So there would be a neuron here, and its axons would then project up from there because they're ascending sensory neurons. I say second order because the first order sensory neuron is going to be in the dorsal root ganglion. This actually shows it really well. Here's a first order neuron in the dorsal root ganglion. It would synapse with another neuron, which is not shown here, and then this would go up towards the brain. Dorsal horn has mostly sensory neurons. Lateral horn has visceral motor neurons. Lateral horn has visceral motor neurons. Ventral horn has somatic motor neurons. In the ventral horn, we typically have somatic motor neurons. So the ventral root are efferent fibers. Ventral root is made of, this ventral root is efferent. Dorsal root is afferent. So 3 horns: dorsal, lateral, ventral horns. We do have a connection of the gray matter that's surrounding the central canal. That's called the gray commissure, the posterior and anterior gray commissure. Commissure is kind of a misnomer. Commissure means axons, fibers that go back and forth between hemispheres. These aren't axons, these are cell bodies in the gray matter. White matter is where we have axons. So not the best name, but that's what it's called, gray commissure. Now as far as the white matter, we call these columns. So this is posterior, this is the posterior column. The posterior column is mostly ascending sensory tracts. The lateral column is mostly efferent motor descending tracts. Anterior column is kind of a mix. Some are motor, some are sensory. I say mostly because there's always some exceptions. Like there is one pathway of, is it pain? I forget off the top of my head. I think it's deep pressure. Anyways, there is one pathway that is ascending sensory in the lateral side, but it's also mostly motor. So posterior column, mostly sensory. Lateral column, mostly motor. Anterior column, it's a mix. Sometimes you get decussation. Shown here, let's say you've got a neuron that's ending here. This next neuron might just immediately go up, or this same neuron might extend its axon all the way up and then cross in the medulla. The decussation would happen in the pyramids, medullary pyramids. But sometimes this will synapse to a neuron here, and then this neuron will then cross over and then go up, or vice versa. Like maybe there's a motor neuron coming down and then cross over. The crossing over always happens in this part of the spinal cord. This is called the anterior white commissure. And so in this case, commissure does make sense because we have axons crossing from one side to the other. The anterior white commissure is just above this anterior median fissure, and decussation happens in this location. Decussation happens in the anterior white commissure. I believe I've covered everything. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. If you have any questions, let me know. Lots of different models here. Hopefully that made sense. All right, take care.